Welcome back, everybody, to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host, Solaris BlueRaven, and I'm here with my very special guest, Mike Pipher. And you with me, Mike?
Yep.
Did I say your name right?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure because sometimes I wonder if that doesn't slip a little bit. But what a pleasure it is to have you on tonight. It's so wonderful.
Well, thank you. And like I said, I'm trying to give you a lot of new information that we didn't talk about 2 months ago, and a lot of information that I've just come up with recently. A matter of fact, we just got 300 and some more documents in, all Twilight Zone related, and we have another 300 or 400 documents coming in that has to do with Playhouse 90 and Rod's early career that came out of the Madison, Wisconsin archives. So
Nice.
a lot of new material. You had mentioned another show that you watched was No Gods to Serve.
Mhm.
I had sent you that to watch. That was a live kinescope that was made at Rod's request. He got paid $200 for the script, and he paid $450 to have that film made. He wanted a kinescope of it when it was aired live in 1952 in Cincinnati. It was part of a series called The Storm. It aired only in Cincinnati at the time. And he was hopeful that he could take this print to New York City and show it around and get it put on a national television program, which he actually was able to accomplish 3 years later. So we're thankful that Rod had the foresight. And there's an interesting story about this episode in the film The Storm. The Paley Center, which was the Museum of Broadcasting in New York and LA when I was working with them in the late 80s, now the Paley Center, took an ad out in the New York Times saying we will pay $20,000 for a episode of The Storm by Rod Serling. And there were no known prints. And of course, Rod had his friend Editha, and I had it on tape at the time. And so I talked to Carol Serling about it, and I said, Carol, I said, here's what I would like to propose to you. I said, let's, supply them with this for the Paley Center Museum, and you take $10,000 for the trust, and we'll take $10,000 for the foundation. So we had this arrangement made. What happened was somebody in Cincinnati, where Rod wrote the series and it aired, was doing a retrospective on Rod Serling's early work, found out that there was a print in Ithaca, called there, and somebody made a video transfer and sent it to them without Carol Serling's permission. Well, that was fine until the Paley Center got word that they were screening this, and somebody at Cincinnati shipped it to the Paley Center for free. So it cost Carol Serling $10,000 and the foundation $10,000.
Oh, wow.
Because of that incident, that's what ended the relationship with the Serling family, with the Serling Trust. Even the foundation, which she was a member of the board, would no longer have access to Rod's films at Ithaca. So we had to stop doing our film festivals. It's just, even to this day, some people on the staff there wanted to watch one of the Serling pieces of Slow Fade to Black, and they would not give permission. They had to go to the Paley Center to watch it there in New York City. So, it created a bad feeling because, money does come into play on some occasions, especially since Rod basically lost out on the Twilight Zone. Most of your listeners that are familiar with Twilight Zone probably realize that Cayuga Productions was Rod's production company. Actually, I found out recently in these documents that Carol Serling owned 50% and Rod Serling owned 50% of Cayuga Productions. So when Rod decided to sell his rights to the 50% they owned of the Twilight Zone series, the amount was $480,000. CBS had to write a check for $240,000 to Rod and another check for $240,000 to his wife, Carol. And so they really feel that, they've been cheated out of all of this royalties, but it wasn't a matter of being cheated. Rod made the decision on his own. There were no royalties then. He never envisioned that this would be airing every day, for the rest of eternity, basically.
Right, yeah.
There's been a day in the world someplace that Twilight Zone does not air to this day, and it's become over $1 billion a year. Billion, B as in boy, and that's a lot of money. So you can understand where the Serling family has little animosity that all this money is being made and they're not getting any part of it.
Well, who's getting the money now, Mike? Who gets the profit?
It's all CBS and Viacom.
Holy cow!
The Serling Trust gets nothing because they sold their 50%. They sold their rights, and it's a shame. Now the opposite holds true, that Rod's written words, the scripts, still belong to the Serling estate. However, The Night Gallery strips that Rod wrote belong to Universal Studios, not the Serlings. And this is interesting because I just found from Nick this evening in his book that in Anne Serling's book, she showed a picture of Rod on the set of the Night Gallery that he inscribed to her when she was growing up. She was still a youngster, and they had funny pet names for each other, Cuddles and different things, and Piggly Wiggly and whatever they may be. And she wanted to use that in her book. She had to get permission from Universal Studios to use the picture of her dad that he inscribed to her.
Ah, that's terrible.
That's how pathetic it is out there when it comes to copyright. So,
wow.
So at least the Serlings own the Twilight Zone strips, and yes, all the books are out. All the Twilight Zone strips are out there, and they're making some money off of that. They sell rights to do stage presentations and things like that. So, but as far as Night Gallery, they don't even own the written word.
That's amazing. That just blows me away.
It is. It's crazy.
Yep.
So going back to No Gods to Serve, it's a Korean War story. Again, very hard-hitting, very heavy, very powerful. And the series was so funny because it was in Rod's early days. I mean, he graduated in 1950, started writing radio and TV in 1949, and most of the early stuff was really fluff and nonsense garbage, and I'm going to give you some examples of the early work. But the Storm series, I mean, that's a powerful film.
Oh, I loved it.
You can tell how small the set was, and the ceilings were only like 9 feet tall, and the lights, and they had, you can hear some of the people that were involved with the props for that episode while they were on that Cincinnati program I mentioned. Mm-hmm. And it's just amazing. There were no sets. It's just like a 10 by 10 room,
right?
With short ceiling and a dirt floor.
You could tell, but the acting was so good, and the lighting was.
The acting is very good, and I'm glad you keep mentioning the lighting because that's what gives the black and white the surrealism. Mm-hmm. And if these things had been done in color, they wouldn't hold up today. You would lose track of you being sucked right into the thing in black and white. It's like you are there.
Yeah.
You're a part of it. But that series, the first few, Rod wrote at the end. There was season 1. It was a lady that was writing these things for the Storm, and Rod wrote 7 or 8 of the first season, and he didn't even put his name on them. He used fake names because he said if some of these aren't very good, and if they don't get good reviews, I don't want my name affiliated. It'll ruin my career later on. But by the time second season came around, they were Rod Serling all the way. He did 22 of the second season.
Nice.
So, that's a very prime example of early, rare Serling material that's now on there. I've seen bootlegs of it on eBay, but they're such poor quality. And again, this came right from Rod's own print, so the quality was really there.
Right. You mentioned, I know we touched on this before, but he was actually, he used to narrate radio, but they didn't like his voice.
Back in 1946, right when the war ended, he came into New York City, and some friends that he had gone to high school with, Jack Levine and his mother, saw Rod in his uniform with a duffel bag over his shoulder on Fifth Avenue, and I interviewed him about May of this year, and he told me that they ran off the bus. They said, "Stop the bus, we've got to get off." And they said, "Rod, I see you're just discharged. Where are you going from here?" Well, remember, his dad had just died a year earlier. Mom had moved to Syracuse back with the sister. He says, "I don't know what I'm going to do." And so the Levine said, "You're going to come home and live with us." So Rod came back to Bing-hamton, and he lived with the Levines on Leroy Street right near the high school for 2 months, and he worked as a radio announcer for our WYNR radio. After 2 months, Rod Serling was fired because he had such a terrible speaking voice. And I said, that guy's probably turned over in his grave 10,000 times by now because Rod Serling has the most unique known voice in the world.
Right.
And anybody hears that voice, it's Rod Serling. And so that was crazy. And then from here, after he was fired, he moved to Schenectady with an aunt, and from there he went to Antioch in the fall of '46. That's where his brother Robert had gone, and he went under the GI Bill, paying for the education. So, a lot of your listeners probably don't realize that Rod was a war hero. He enlisted when he was 18 on January 15th, one day after graduating in 1943. He wanted to be a paratrooper because he kept seeing in the movies when you used to get a newsreel and a cartoon, and a comedy short and then the feature film, you just see all these people parachute jumping in the war. And he said, that's for me. That's what I want to do. So he and 4 of his buddies joined together the very next morning at 8 o'clock after graduation. Unfortunately, Rod Stoll was in his writings through high school. He was editor of their magazine, and he kept writing how he wanted to go to war and fight the Nazis because of the Holocaust, but it ended up that, he ended up in the Philippines and Guam, not over in Europe. But, he was so traumatized, seeing a lot of his friends killed. One was a very brutal decapitation that was an accident. When they were dropping the food crates, they had not eaten for 5-6 days. And after they started dropping crates with the parachutes with the food, this one guy, Mr. Melvin Levy, was standing out there, make sure you send a rabbi down to bless the food. And he was just joking around, and he did not get out of the way. The shell fire came against the airplane, so they started dropping food crates without parachutes, and one landed on him and beheaded him. Oh. And Rod and the other soldiers witnessed this. They were best friends. They buried him right there on the spot. Rod made a Jewish Star of David out of twigs, and they had a little memorial. So he was severely traumatized, seeing a lot of his friends. Matter of fact, of the 200 or so that were in the one unit that he was serving in, right out there with machetes in the jungle, only 50 survived. Wow. It was just a horrific thing. But Rod was wounded a couple of times, a lot of shrapnel to the knee, the wrist, and the eye, which bothered him the rest of his life. And so while he was in Manila, in the hospital for a month, he said that he took up writing as a form of therapy. But he was actually a war hero because later on they were in Japan, in Manila, right before the end of the war, doing some cleanup. And there was a stage program being on. There was a young girl doing a dance or singing or whatever, and they were being under attack. And Rod jumped up on stage, grabbed her, pulled her down, and dragged her off into a building and stayed with her and saved her life. So, that's something a lot of people don't realize in Rod Serling's career. And that's why the horrors of war were so important to Rod, that while he was at Antioch, he wrote a 38-page short story called First Squad, First Platoon, about 5 of his comrades who were all killed in front of him. There's a story dealing with each one of them. And Rod Serling immortalized all of his war buddies, most that were killed and some that weren't, in Twilight Zones, in Planet of the Apes. In everything he wrote, he used their names. And there's a classic example of 4 of his friends that were killed in the Battle of Leyte over there. Hibbard, Horton, Morgan, and Levy are all mentioned in one sentence in the Twilight Zone. The Purple Testament is the 4 people that were just killed in action. And he used their names over and over again in many, many episodes. It's just great. And, and a lot of writers do that. He also used Carol and Anne and Jody, his character names, his wife and daughters, in many episodes. In that Night Gallery with Edward G. Robinson, the doctor is Dr. Jack Levine, and that's the gentleman I just told you that met Rod in New York, brought him back, and he lived with them. So, he immortalized the McNulty sisters in their tearing down Tim Riley's bar. They were on my board of directors when I was president. A couple of funny older ladies, really eccentric. So he would use the names of his family and friends, as well as the local bus station and the local bars and things that are important in many episodes of both Twilight Zone and Night Gallery.
He was quite amazing. He also had a limp too, didn't he? From the war?
Not much of a limp,
okay.
But what happened there is Anne Serling tells it best in her book on her dad that he would fall down the steps. He'd be coming down from the bedroom, and his wound would just start bleeding by itself after 20, 30 years, and the pain was horrendous, and it would make him fall a lot. And so it did bother him, but when I met him, there was certainly no limp. I've never seen any footage of a limp as such, but the wounds were there and they did bother him. I guess it got to the point that sometimes he did wear a knee type of a brace.
Yeah, he was quite the man. There's no doubt about it. Do you think he received any premonitions prior to his death? Do you think he had a foreboding kind of a psychic image or anything like that connected to it?
I don't really think so because, Anne Serling tells again, he was pretty weak the last couple of days. Again, he had that second heart attack when he was on a treadmill at their home, and they took him. He had just been in the hospital for like 10 days in Ithaca with a mild heart attack when he had the second one, and they said, you're going to have either a heart transplant or major heart surgery, and we have to take you to Rochester. So the EMT crew that drove him from Ithaca to Rochester stopped and had cigarettes. Rod insisted on getting out and having cigarettes on the way to Strong Memorial Hospital in Rochester, and he said the emergency crew smoked right along with him. I said, I can't imagine people allowing things like that to take place. But she was telling, right before they took him into surgery, that he says, don't worry, honey, I'm fine. I'm going to be fine. There's nothing going to happen to me. He did not seem to have any foreboding that he was going to die in that surgery. And I'm so glad, because it has to be a horrible feeling to think you're going to die or know you're going to die. It's just, it's just, and death is not something that's nice for anybody. We're all going to experience it. But, the only blessing that you can ever say is when you're dying on the operating table or something, you don't even know it really.
Right.
You don't feel the pain of it. You don't have the foreboding and the horrors that so many people do suffer. So I don't think he had that sense of foreboding.
Well, that's good. He just he seemed to write so much about spirits, ghosts, the paranormal, anomalous energies. I was always curious insofar as what we kind of discussed that maybe he was kind of haunted to some degree, and that could have been probably from his battle, in the war. But I always thought to myself, it just seemed like he had things that were always connected to him, that were maybe inspiring him to some degree with his writing.
Yes, like I said, 25% of everything he wrote, the live television right through his death, had to do with war of one format or another. And when it came to Vietnam, by the time the 70s came, he was right out there marching and protesting, and really an outspoken opponent, because we don't even call it a war. It was a conflict. And what was going on, it was just horrifying to Rod. And so this story that I mentioned, the 38-piece page that he wrote, First Squad, First Platoon, the handwritten note is right on it. This is for my daughters or my future children to read, so that I can tell them of the horrors of war myself and not let them learn it on their own. So, he was hoping, to get married and have children, and he did. And the family did not even know that this 38-page program existed till it was discovered in the boxes of his letters in Madison, Wisconsin, at the archives there. They had approached Rod while he was alive, and he donated 80 boxes of all of his letters and correspondence to that archive. So I've not been there, but Nick and Amy and the other Twilight Zone writers and Rod Serling writers have, and have been able to copy a lot of this. So the Serling families have only gotten recently, a few years ago, a copy of that 38-page thing that was meant for the children through Amy Boyle Johnson, who was the first to uncover it. And so if it was not for her diligent research, the Serling family would never have even seen this thing that Rod wrote basically for them.
Wow, that's amazing, isn't it, that they didn't even know?
Yeah, I mean, no, they had no idea.
You think they would have rummaged through all his books and his paperwork or something?
Well, you have to remember that Rod transferred this stuff in the 60s to Madison himself and boxed it up. And he probably had even forgotten, would be my guess, that he had written it, or he would have made sure he found a copy and gave it to the kids, which was the intended purpose of it.
Right.
So, that's just, more aspects of, war and what it can do to you. She also tells in her book that he would wake up with terrific sweats and nightmares, as do most people with now what we call post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Right, yeah.
So, disorder. And it's got to be a horrible thing when you see all your friends killed like this. And, Rod Serling is fortunate that he survived the war, because he was talking about being out there with a machete and going through the jungles, and all of a sudden he looks up, and like 15 feet in front of him is a Japanese soldier with a rifle poised, ready to shoot and kill him. And Rod said, I froze. He says, I'm going to die. He froze. He didn't know what to do. But Rod Serling was only 5'4.5" tall, and the buddy came up behind him and, shot over Rod's right shoulder and took out the enemy. If it wasn't for that, there would be no Rod Serling as we know him today.
Right.
So it's just, that had to be horrific in and of itself, that one experience, too.
Talk about an angel on your shoulder, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And of course, it seems like he did channel a lot of that through his writing. There's no doubt about it, and the intensity of all of his scripts and the shows in general. It's all very
Yeah.
fascinating.
Let's jump to something else that's different that we didn't talk about before.
Hmm.
And Rod Serling was into all kinds of sports when he grew up here in Binghamton in high school. And one of them was baseball. He had a fascination with it. We had a New York Yankees farm team here in Binghamton, Johnson City, called the Triplets. And the Triplets, in their contract, every player had to play at least one game a year here, including Babe Ruth had played here, Lou Gehrig, Mickey Mantle, Whitey Ford. So I was privileged to see Mickey Mantle, Whitey Ford, Thurman Munson. A lot of these players would be here for that one game a year for our All-Star game, and I got to see them when I grew up. But Rod's brother Robert told that Rod, they didn't have a lot of money, and so they would ride their bicycle and they would stand behind the out back portion of the ballpark, and if they caught a fly ball that went over for a home run and they turned it in, they would get a free ticket to any game they wanted. And our stadium was so small that anybody that was worth a salt could hit a home run. So sometimes they get 8 or 10 free tickets in a day.
Nice.
He and his friends. So they went to baseball stuff a lot. And there was a story that I was given about a year ago from a restaurateur here that supplies us with a pizza for our programs. And he said a friend of mine was in the 2nd or 3rd grade with Rod, and they were giving an English assignment to write a complete story in 25 words or less. And he told me that Rod would just sit there in the window looking out and not be writing. And it was a rainy day, and the teacher come up and said, Rod, why aren't you writing? Now these other kids are writing stuff and wadding it up and throwing them on the floor and starting over. He says, well, I'm thinking. And in a few minutes, he wrote a complete story in 9 words. And it says, triplets playing ball, it's gonna rain, everybody go home. Complete story from start to finish in 9 words. I think it's an amazing thing, and I'm going to put that up on our website. And so then I start researching his early works. In 1953, there was a live show called Old MacDonald Had a Curve, about an 80-year-old gentleman in a nursing home that throws his arm out, and he has the most unbelievable curve, and he ends up going to the majors in New York City. It's hysterical. And the only bad thing about it is there is one known print in the world at UCLA Archive. I'm hoping we can do a trade-off. I'd love to see it.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I have the script and Rod's notes, and Rod said that you cannot bring comedy to live television like that in the early 50s. It just didn't work. It was too hard because you didn't have the sets, you didn't have the action. And so this was pretty much a failure. The old gentleman that played the old MacDonald character kept forgetting his lines, and although it was a very hysterical script, it did not go over that well. So he said, never again will I write, comedy for live television. Yes, he did some Twilight Zones that were comedies and some night galleries, but for live TV. So that was a cute baseball story. Then again, in 1955, another baseball story, The Man Who Caught the Ball at Coogan's Bluff. And so, then he goes on to the most important part of what I'm telling you, is the Twilight Zone episode called The Mighty Casey. And the gentleman that started it was Robert Serling, and he played a robot baseball pitcher. And the interesting thing about this episode, there's 2 things that are fascinating about this episode that most of your listeners won't know, and probably yourself, and I didn't know a lot of it till recently. There was a movie about that time with Paul Douglas called Angels in the Outfield. And Paul Douglas was an old character actor, and he played the head baseball coach. So he was hired by Rod, who did a lot of the hiring himself, to play the manager, a character in this robot fantasy picture story. But nobody realized how ill he was, and he died the very next day after shooting of a heart attack that had basically been taking place the whole 3 or 4 days of the shooting. Said he was out of breath all the time, and you could see it in the film. And Rod felt that it gave the film, when watching it, what he wrote was a comedy, but it didn't play as a comedy very good because of the illness of Paul Douglas. So Rod went to CBS and says, I want to reshoot this whole thing. It's just too ominous. We don't dare air this. CBS watched it, said it's good enough. We're not going to go to the expense. And Rod was so angry and says, I'm going to refilm it. And he paid $21,000 out of his pocket to reshoot the episode. This time, they changed the manager's character to Jack Warden, and the rest of the cast was the same. But they goofed up in the editing, and in the very last scene, if you were to watch the episode now, you will see Paul Douglas as the manager in the distance with his back towards you, that they forgot to cut that scene out.
Oh,
and
wow.
But what's interesting, for twofold, Jack Warden was fighting in the Philippines at the same time as Rod. So they did not know each other, but I've read some interviews of Jack Warden talking about the same battles and things, although they weren't together. But the most fascinating part of the story is Robert Serling, who played the robot, was convicted of murder in 2005 and was sentenced to 32 years to life, so he's still in prison at 85 years old in California. And it's just amazing. He got into a bar fight and killed Arthur DeLong and attempted murder on Edward Sanchez. So he still signs autographs.
Oh my gosh, really?
He can write to the prison,
and
he can handwrite you anything, but he can't stock himself photos that he could sign if you ask for a signed photo. But if you send him a photo, he will sign it, and it takes about 6 weeks. And so here he's still signing things from prison, which I find fascinating. It's just,
wow.
I'm sure it wasn't an intended murder situation, but people get drunk and things happen.
Right.
And there's just part of the curse of the Twilight Zone that a lot of people say are out there.
Right, yeah, there is kind of a curse to
know,
the Twilight Zone, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, there's many wonderful books. There's 3 of them by one author called The Curse of the Twilight Zone Stars. And I recommend your listeners check it out on Amazon. The very first volume, if you just type in Twilight Zone Curse, it's going to bring them up. I read it twice back to back. It's spellbinding. They're so well documented that you have to believe what's in these things. I want to bring the author in for a program pretty soon. Even one of the cases that involves President Obama and the CIA. It's just absolutely amazing. And there were some newspaper articles that are shown in there talking about the curse of the Twilight Zone. And Rod sued the newspaper and said, you guys got to stop talking about this. He says, I can't hire anybody anymore, even for the night galleries, that nobody wants to work for me.
Right.
So it really was out there a lot from the late 60s with the Twilight Zone being over and things that had happened, or supposedly happened at least, right through night galleries. I'm having trouble hiring stars for my shows.
That's amazing. Well, you are quite the historian when it comes to the Rod Serling information. I swear, you're top of the line. I'm so appreciative of you. It's really nice to have someone like you keep all the records and keep the information. Yeah,
and I'm trying to get more and more on our website. Our webmaster I haven't seen in a year, but if I send him things, he gets around to it, when he gets there.
Right.
But we need to get a lot more of this material out there, especially material that's documented, where we have the actual copies of documents in our files at the exhibit. And I'm working on that now, coding a lot of things and doing a whole binder of 300 Twilight Zone related exhibits. And there's a funny story. It's we have documents from CBS Intermemos, and every TV show, even today, when a show airs, everybody wants to get a plug-in TV guide, or in the newspapers, or in the magazines, or on the radio. So back then, you would send weekly a press photo showing the star of the movie or a scene from the episode, and talking about the cast and the storyline. And not every week would the TV guides pick up anything. Sometimes you get a quarter-page ad really pushing a star or a story that sounded good. Most of the time, you just got 9 p.m. title and a little blurb, and that's it. So one of the office memos from CBS says, what can we do to create more interest and get more of these articles printed on a weekly basis? So somebody came up with the idea of making funny cartoons that would be so outrageous and catch the eye of the person that's getting this at the magazine or newspaper that they're going to laugh and remember it and use them. and they give an example of a drawing they did of a young lady who's doing something with her right hand. You see her from the backside, doing something with her right hand, doing something with her left hand, and then she bends over, and with the third hand, she's scratching her butt from the front side to the back. Now, this is literally spelled out word for word how crazy these things are, and they would put them on their bulletin boards and dart boards and have fun with them, and they started using more and more of these. So we recently got in a funny wire photo from CBS for the Carol Burnett episode, Cavender is Coming. And that was a comedy episode about a bumbling angel. And the photo shows Rod in the clouds with 3 male boss angels sitting there, and Rod being, 5'4.5", and about a 7-foot lady alien or angel type of creature walking past him, and his head is cocked. He's facing front, but his head is cocked to the left, and he's staring right at her butt because the butt's about in his face because she's so tall and he's so short. Now, it's a funny photo because that's not in the episode. That lady character of the angel alien type thing is not even in the episode. So it was done just as a gag for the promotion. And it's like today you go to the movies and you see a trailer coming to attractions, and then you see the movie. The scene's not even in the movie.
Right.
You see a lot of that even today with making films. So some of these documents that we have are absolutely bizarre, like this one is, and they give other examples, and they were really cute. So when I saw that photo of Rod, which was basically doing what they wanted it to do, I said, we have to have that. So it's on display right now.
Awesome. And also, let's give everybody a rundown as far as how to get in touch with you with the museum itself, because I want to switch gears and go into Hollywood for the next 30 minutes. So, but let everybody know let the hours and all the good stuff, email and all that great stuff.
Okay, yeah, you can reach the Rod Serling Archive. Is simply rodserlingarchive.org. The Bundy Museum website, which has connections to the Rod Serling Archive, is bundymuseum.org. They host the Serling Archive there, and it's just one of many wonderful exhibits that are on display at the Bundy Museum. Matter of fact, we've just added 3 new buildings, so now instead of the 3 homes, there's 3 more that back up to our property, and it's becoming the Bundy Museum complex.
Nice.
They have major space for more exhibits coming in, and you can reach me personally through the website. There's a link for our new Rod Serling email, and it's rodserlingarchive@gmail.com. And I personally answer every comment, question that comes by, and something as simple as please add my name to your Rod Serling mailing list, because I hope to do a first newsletter recapping the events of the year by Christmas, which was Rod's birthday. So those are the easiest ways. And we appreciate all comments. I mean, if you look at the website and you see something you don't think is good, tell us. We want to know so how we can improve it. If you see something you'd like more of, tell us so we can add more. We want to please the viewers because we want people coming back to it over and over again. So we try and add new material. We have many props that we've been fortunate to buy, 3 or 4 from the same source that was Henry Grace was a set designer for all 5 years of the Twilight Zone. And so we have the Leonard Nimoy helmet is on display now from the Quality of Mercy episode. And we just got a new prop in the day before our last In the Zone. So I wouldn't even tell people about it because I want them to wait and see it when we redo the archive exhibit in April. But it's a neat piece. I'll tell you guys. It's a gambling device out of a casino that was used in one episode in particular, The Prime Mover with Buddy Epson, where he can make the dice move or the cards move or anything move, a car, whatever. And it's a very prominent piece. And it's a device that you won't find in casinos anymore. And I actually played this thing in Atlantic City and won money on it twice.
Oh, wow.
Cool. It's about 1.5 feet tall, weighs about 10 pounds, and it looks like an hourglass. And you would just flip it, and the 3 dice inside, you were trying to get 3 of a kind, 3 5s, 3 6s. I only played it once in Atlantic City in the 80s. I bet $5. I bet 3 6s. It came up. I won $300. I bet it back to back. It came up again. I won $300 and walked away.
Nice.
But you don't see these in casinos anymore. I haven't seen them in a casino in 25 years.
Wow,
So
yeah.
it's a game that's no longer there, but this is a real prop. We have the note from the set designer, and it's an amazing piece that will go on display in April of next year when we change the format again of the archive exhibit.
That's so cool. It's such a time capsule. And I know in times like these, we could be discussing things about the worldly affairs, and I get really burned out because it's extremely noxious. So it's nice to kind of go down this memory lane and just capture this man, what he did, and all the impact he had on so many people with his information, because it touched the hearts and souls and spirits of so many. And it was so multifaceted, all of these shows. And I have to thank you, Mike, for all the things you do as a legacy to keep this going, because I know you put a lot of hard work, time, and energy into it.
Yeah, it's been since 1971,
Yeah.
and I really, the 7 or 8 years with the foundation in the late 80s, early 90s, and now the 9+ years here, and hopefully until my last breath, I will be doing this. So to segue into some of my celebrity stories, again, they all came about by knowing these celebrities through my film collecting hobby in the 70s on up, and I'll segue with Lloyd Bridges, Leonard Nimoy, and Adolphe Menjou. And I'll bring us in because this is important to Rod's career too. As I mentioned briefly, Rod fought vehemently against the censorship, but he also fought against the McCarthyism, the loyalty oath, the idea of signing a loyalty oath to the United States saying you're not a communist. Well, if you were a communist, you'd have no problem signing it because you wanted them to think you weren't.
Mhm.
But Rod actually refused. There was one college in California that wanted Rod to do a speech, and they said, you have to sign a loyalty oath. And he absolutely refused. He says, well, you can't come and speak. He said, that's fine, I won't come. Well, then they begged him again, well, please come. We won't, we won't make you sign it, but we just can't pay you your $150 stipend. He says, well, that's fine. So he got there to make a speech, and they says, nope, you still have to sign a loyalty oath. And he told them what they could do for themselves, and he walked away. So, so back in 1951 or 2, there was an anthology show. I don't remember the title, but it was a weekly series, different type of stories, and it's the only film that Lloyd Bridges ever directed. And he was such a good friend of mine in later years that I got the film from him. And what happened was Leonard Nimoy was his first role on television in this episode Lloyd directed, and Leonard Nimoy had a small part as an Indian. And it also starred a character actor named Adolphe Menjou. Actually, he was a pretty big actor in the 30s and 40s. And so you take those three names together, Lloyd Bridges, Leonard Nimoy, and Adolphe Menjou. Adolphe Menjou turned Lloyd Bridges and Leonard Nimoy in as communists.
What?
Yeah. Okay. Now, Lloyd says, Mike, I was never communist, but he says, I am a firm believer at the time of the one world government. He says, the only way we can take care of the hunger problems and stuff is with a one world government. So, that you can't tie that directly to communism. Leonard Nimoy also denied it, but it destroyed both of their careers for several years. Lloyd and Leonard did not get any work. And so I don't care for the name of Adolphe Menjou too much, but, it just ties into Rod because of Rod's being forced to sign one, which he wouldn't do on 2 different occasions. So, and then, of course, Lloyd becoming the star of the Loner series and becoming a good friend of Rod's. I have dozens of handwritten letters from Lloyd. He had beautiful penmanship. And one of them talks about Rod in there when I asked him, and he tells what a good friend he was and stuff, and his personal stories about the Loner. So, Lloyd was very dear. And I also knew Jeff Bridges quite well. Never been to his home or anything, but I met Jeff at Warner Brothers on the set of Jagged Edge. He had just finished Starman, and I was out there buying a film package, and up walks Jeff Bridges, and I stopped him, and I said, can I get a picture? And we talked a few minutes, and I said, you probably don't realize this, but I said, you've been getting a lot of VHS videos recently of your home movies, of you growing up in the family, and all of your dad's films. I said, those all came from me. So he then put the connection. So my name, whenever I sent a package to the house, he opened it immediately instead of throwing them into a pile where his agents would, filter a few to him once in a while. It might take a year or two. And so if I sent Jeff a package Monday overnight, I would get a package back the next day from Jeff. He sent me many rare and wonderful gifts. And Jeff is just as personable and warm and kind as his father was. But he actually invited me onto the closed set of Jagged Edge. He was going in to film some scenes, and if you remember the film, it's just a powerhouse of a movie. Glenn Close's first major starring role, and just an amazing film. So they even allowed me to take pictures during takes. And the gentleman that played the judge on Jagged Edge was John Daner, who did a couple of Twilight Zones, and was amazing. So I had pictures of me talking to John Daner on the set as the judge in his full regalia, and he was an interesting character actor because another favorite sitcom of mine that I found through film collecting was called The Valleys of Balboa, about a little boat up in Balboa, California on the coast, and it starred Sterling Holloway, who was the voice of Winnie the Pooh, and also became a very dear friend of mine. And then it starred John Daner and Paul Ford, a great comic actor. And so I told him I found a lot of these on film, and I transferred them. Would you like a copy? He says, I've never watched one thing that I've ever made in my whole 30, 40 years of film acting at that point. He just had no interest. He refused to watch anything. But he was pretty eccentric and quite a character. But, it was thrilling that, of everybody that's done a Twilight Zone or a Night Gallery or an earlier work of Rod Serling, I've had the privilege of meeting 32 celebrities. And so I have some unique stories and things that, most people don't have. Some, like Lloyd, I became great friends with. And whenever we go to the house, my sister and I, and even another couple that went with us, Lloyd would come out. He'd open the car doors for all of us. He'd pull our chairs out before we ate. They'd pray before they ate. I mean, just warm, kind, generous, loving people. Some of my celebrity stories are miserable, obnoxious, horror stories.
Which ones are miserable and obnoxious?
Well, Mickey Rooney started funny because I met him. I called him on the phone. He was doing Sugar Babies in New York. Had to be in mid to late 70s. And he had just been on Carson the night before saying, I'm looking for a 16-millimeter film of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. Well, I had one. So I said I might as well sell it to him. So he comes to the phone and he says, I've already bought one. He said, somebody else already sold me for it. It's just in the one night. But he says, when you come on down and see the show, he says, I'll tell you where I hide my car. I park my car so, I can sneak out of the theater quick during curtain calls and nobody's going to mob me and stuff. And we'll get to visit for a while. So I saw the show and I met him there. I'm waiting for him to come running down the street like he says he does, because he was real short too. I don't even know if he was as tall as Rod was. And he was so funny. And we're sitting there, but while I'm waiting, I look in, you see these golf clubs about 2 feet tall, and you see these shoes about, look like about 6 inches. I mean, it was like toy props. But that was Mickey Rooney's clothes and his shoes, and he was quite a character. And you could talk until people saw them when they were waiting for Ann Miller, and they would look down and see him around the corner. And then they start mobbing. He says, gotta go, and he'd roll the window up and take off. But he was very kind, very generous, and of course, he starred in the Playhouse 90 that Rod wrote, The Comedian. Rod adapted that and won his 3rd Emmy for the show, and he wrote it specifically styled for Mickey Rooney. And so he would describe stuff back then, to Mike or to Bob or whatever. So now you jump to the last 10 years when Rooney was doing all these Hollywood lecture shows that my friends would run, and he'd charge $50 for an autograph, which was about average for, a pretty big name celebrity. But let's say you went up to him and says, my name is Solaris, will you make it out to me? He says, I'm not here to write a blank book. And he'd swear at you and everything. He was just an ornery cuss later in life, but God love him. I said, he passed away a year or so ago at 92. He was the biggest known, one of the biggest, actors in Hollywood history. As a matter of fact, Clark Gable named him the king. Mickey Rooney was #1 box office in the world for 3 years when he was doing the Andy Hardy movies and the Judy Garland and the Mickey Rooney musicals, Busby Berkeley's. #1 box office in the world. That's quite a thing. And he played literally every instrument. He wrote over 3,000 songs. Some of his films in the 50s even have some of the songs in them. And just an amazing career. But he was so funny when you check out the Playhouse 90 box set that's out there and you talk to the directors and the writers and stuff about Mickey Rooney. When they were filming The Comedian, it was live in New York City, and you'd be doing a week of rehearsals. And every day, Mickey Rooney, they said, would bring in a new girl he picked up the night before. And he says, you got to put her in a background scene. I promised her a part in the show. You know, and says every day there'd be a different girl that he had picked up
Good.
the night before. And
Wasn't he married like I don't know how many times?
yeah, 7 or 8 times. Yeah,
Jeez. Yeah.
yeah, and twice back to back with the one Ava Gardner.
Oh, she
So
was
you
pretty.
know, it's
Yeah.
just she was beautiful. But you know, Rooney was quite a character and a lot of fun in person until it just came down near the end when you know he was fighting for money. As a matter of fact, when he died, he only had $3,000 to his name.
Really? That's a
Yeah,
shame.
he had no money, and you know he was really hated in Hollywood, and it's unfortunate because he was such a powerhouse and such a talent. I mean, he won so many Emmys and
Hmm.
a powerhouse in comedy, drama, musicals, whatever. But they said, you know, he would go to try and crash a party, and they'd open the door and see it was him, and they'd say, "You're not welcome here," and they'd slam the door and leave him out in the cold.
Oh
I mean,
wow.
he was just so rude, and unfortunately, you sow what you know, reap what you sow. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
it just is unfortunate.
Yeah.
Uh, I'll give you a great story on Bob Hope because everybody knows who Bob Hope was,
Hmm.
and Bob Hope had been here in Binghamton in our golf course called the BC Open, which is BC Comics Johnny Hart, who was from Nineveh, right outside of Binghamton. And we're working on a new Johnny Hart permanent exhibit at the museum. We're working with the family. Well, Bob Hope was there. It was a real rainy day, and I bought tickets, and my uncle and I, and that was a terrible storm. And they were still playing golf, and he was paired up with Lee Trevino, who was a big name golfer, and then the third person in the party was some high-ranking bishop in the Catholic Church. And they got to this one hole, and like there couldn't be 50 people there instead of the 20,000 that's usually following because of the storm. I couldn't believe they let them still play. And so Bob Hope gets up there and he shanks his ball right into the water on this pond to his right. And this bishop says to Bob, he says, since he was laughing, he says, I suppose your balls bounce off the water, is what Bob said to the bishop because he was laughing so hard. Well, he said that your balls bounce off the water. And I think he meant to say that your ball bounces off the water. Well, it was so funny that Trevino just got right down in the mud and rolled around for 5 minutes in pure hysterics. So Hope was really upset the rest of the game. And on the 18th green, there was quite a gathering there because it was the only uh, hole that was televised nationwide. The rest of it was just televised locally. And Bob had not had even a par, and Bob was a great golfer. And so he has about a 2.5 foot putt for a par. And he figures, well, I'm on camera, no problem. Well, I spoiled it for him. And I didn't mean to, but it happened. And he had on white pants with all these green and blue and red words, par and bogey and eagle, all these golf terms. So just as he went to do his backstroke and hopefully get his par, I yelled out to the top of my lungs, "Hey, Fancy Pants," because that was a movie that he did with Lucille Ball,
Hmm.
Fancy Pants, and that was always happening. Well, he hit the ball right off the green. I mean, he just whacked that sucker and just threw his clubs and walked off, beat red, got in his golf cart, and damn near ran me over. And it was so I've got pictures. I've got pictures of Bob, you know, almost running me over. So then we jump ahead to the Larry King radio show. And I had gone to New York City and paid $75 with a friend of mine for a Bob's 75th birthday party. And it was called Bob Hope, My Favorite Comedian at Radio City. And Woody Allen and I forgot who Nick Cavett took all of Bob's old movies and made a composite of all of his funny scenes and called it My Favorite Comedian. And it was only shown there once and would never be shown again. So here I'm sitting about 10 rows back with my friend, and it hadn't started yet. And I hear a voice that I know really well. It's Shelley Winters. And I turn around, and she's sitting right behind me. And I introduced myself and my friend, and I told her what a fan I was of hers and, you know, how I collected films and had this great library and a lot of her films, even some TV appearances. And she says, well, you know, she says, I'm taking my godsons to Bob's private birthday party after the show across the street at Lincoln Center. She says, you and your friend are coming as my guest. So now we're elated. So here we go. And, you know, by invitation only, they had advertised in the New York Times this big birthday tribute and that Sinatra and Dean and every major celebrity was going to be there. But nobody liked Bob Hope, and they all snubbed him. Nobody shows up. So now I'm here with this dead party with Shelley Winters and her godson. And the only ones there was Andy Warhol, who I watched knock out a waitress. She knocked him out, and he got arrested and hauled off in handcuffs.
Oh, jeez.
Natalie Schaefer from Gilligan's Island, Mrs. Howell. I danced a waltz with her. And that's it. Nobody showed up for this party. So now you got Shelley Winters, who had a very flowery vocabulary. And she gets up there to introduce her godsons to Bob and ask for an autograph. And he lit into her and says, "You're a freeloader. We've never met. You don't know me. You have no right being here. I'm not signing an autograph. Get the hell out of here." And, well, you don't talk to Shelley Winters that way. So she stood there and told him off in words that I can't even remember, but I never heard them then, and probably never will hear them again.
Wow.
So the whole time I'm click, click, click with my camera. And he calls security, "Throw this guy out of here." I said, "You can't throw me out. I'm here with Shelley Winters, and I'm not going nowhere." He had thrown all the press out already. So then the incident with Andy Warhol, I mentioned. And so my friend John had polio, and he had a brace on his leg. And Dolores Hope was such a devout Catholic, she would do anything. So this priest we were talking to says, "I'll get your autograph for you, John." So he took the lobby card, and he went to Dolores, and he's whispering there, and I got pictures, and the cake is there, and Bob's feet red. And she whispers to Bob, "You got to sign this for this young man with polio." So he signed it about 3-inch high letters, Bob Hope, in red marker. And it was so prominent that when we got outdoors, some of the news media was still out there and saw the autograph and asked, "How the heck did you get the autograph?" We'd all been thrown out. So we gave them the story. So they printed an article in the paper the next day of what we had to do to get that autograph. I mean, it's just crazy. So now you jump to Larry King's radio show, and I've been trying to get through for years to talk to Larry because he was best friends of Rod Serling for 10 years together down in Miami. And Rod had, I ended up getting through, and I have a recording of me on Larry King. And he allowed me to talk about the foundation and Rod Serling. And he said, "Rod was a great buddy of mine. I have all these rare videos that we got to dig out and get transferred," which is 25 years later and still not done. I'd love to see some of that. But Bob had been great for about an hour and a half of this 2-hour show, really friendly to all the listeners until I got on. And I brought up the party in New York. First the tribute, which is fine. But when I brought up the party, he went ballistic.
Oh, wow.
And he got so mean for the rest of the half hour. I mean, he was just rude to everybody that called in, his big fans and stuff. So it ruined his night. Now, the last part of the story, a few weeks later, I go to the State Fair here in New York at Syracuse to see Bob Hope in concert. And I wrote it was a hard rain, and the stage was out in the rain, but he was under a cover, and I was in the bleachers. And I wrote a fan letter that sounded like a real fan letter until you got to the third page. And then I told him who I am, and I sent some pictures of him beat red at the party. It just I knew it would really get us going. Well, a few minutes later, a security guard comes up to me. He says, "Mr. Hope wants to see you now." I says, "Can't be now. He's in the middle of a show." He says, "No, he wants you sitting on the back steps in the rain, so when he comes off the stage, he can see you." So John and I go back, and we're sitting there getting poured on, just raining in buckets. So Bob comes out after his show, and he says, "Yeah, Mike," he says, "I remember you. I'll keep the photos." And I said, "That's fine, Bob. I'll remember you, and I'll keep the negatives." so that ends my 3 or 4 part Bob Hope story.
That's awesome.
But you know what's so fun about all of these stories, even the mean and the miserable, it doesn't bother me with their work. I still love his films, his comedy, and respect him for that part of his life.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I have Lucille Ball stories that are nightmares, and I have even Jack Klugman, who did, 4 Twilight Zones, just lied to me and was very rude, and I had proof of it when I interviewed him in New York. And
wow, we're going to have you back, Mike, and talk about this because we're just about out of time here tonight. But it's
Yeah,
been
I didn't even
awesome.
realize it was so late.
It goes by so quick, but I have to thank you so much. Yeah, I always like to hear the dirt on all these guys out there, but in Hollywood. I think it's been fabulous to have you on, and thank you so much. And we do want you back. And of course, I do want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. And stay tuned for Shiny Side Out with David Dunder and Mecky coming up next to sell you on into the night from down under, as they always do with their excellent show. And is there anything else you want to leave us with? I think we might have a minute left, Mike.
Yeah, just have your people check the Serling website and go to a thing that says there's more to Rod Serling than meets the eye, and click on Hollywood Star, and you'll see pictures of me there when I got the star for Rod Serling in Hollywood. You'll see me pictured with Burgess Meredith, Buddy Ebsen, Penny Singleton, Earl Holliman, Bob Cummings, and it'll give people a little glimpse into and even a photo of me being interviewed then for Entertainment Tonight.
Awesome. I did. Yeah, that's fabulous. I did like that movie. It's a Mad, 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 Mad World too. That's classic.
Oh, it is. It's hysterical. And I had made a list of about 50 names to talk about. So sometime you want more of a fun, uplifting, entertaining show than just education about Rod or something,
Oh, definitely. I definitely have to have you back. Yeah.
If I'm on with Rod again, we can do a segment again, because a lot of them do relate. A lot of these people were involved with Rod and his work. So,
well, I think it's interesting too to kind of highlight some of what goes on in Hollywood, the dark side and the positive side, and just kind of shine the light in certain areas. I know you mentioned something about Sandy Duncan off air, and I know we won't have time to talk about it tonight, but I laughed so hard when you told me that.
Yeah, we'll do that next time. I'll just have to phrase it properly.
Okay. All right. Well, everybody, we're out of time here. Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Yeah, have a great week, everybody.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.